welcome to this explainer. Imagine, for a second, stepping out your front door and taking a walk across the planet roughly 50,000 years ago. If you did, you'd find a world that did not belong to just one kind of human. You would actually bump into people who looked almost like us, but not exactly. Some were shorter, incredibly strong, and built specifically for the freezing cold. Others lived on isolated islands and evolved into something that sounds almost unbelievable today. You see, being human back then wasn't just this one monolithic thing. It was a messy, branching, highly experimental family. Evolution was basically just trying out different bodies, different brains, and totally different ways of surviving this incredibly dangerous planet. But today, obviously, things are very different. We are living out this strange solo status. It's honestly an unsettling reality where our whole family tree has been pruned down to just us.
And that brings us to a pretty disturbing central mystery. What exactly happened to everyone else? I mean, one by one, every other branch of our family tree just disappeared. And the truly wild part is we still don't know the full story of why. You know, Homo sapiens, we aren't the strongest humans to have ever lived. We are definitely not the oldest, and we absolutely aren't the ones that have survived the longest on this earth. We are literally just the last ones standing after a very slow, complex disappearance of all our relatives.
Part 1. The million-year survivors. To really shatter any sense of permanence or, superiority we might be holding on to, let's look at our first vanished relative, Homo erectus. Check out this timeline. Homo erectus popped up around 2 million years ago. They had modern-looking bodies, long legs, shorter arms. They were literally built for walking and running across open lands. They were likely among the very first humans to spread far beyond Africa. Now, compare their timeline to ours. They survived for well over 1 million years. That is a ridiculously longer stretch of time than our own species has even existed. So, if we humans today feel like a permanent fixture on Earth, Homo erectus should make us very, very nervous.
Their last known fossils come from Nandang, over on the island of Java, dating back to around 108,000 years ago. Here was a species with just incredible adaptability. I mean, they made stone tools, they hunted, they scavenged, and they held a million-year reign. But eventually, the world changed, the climate became unstable, forests expanded and retreated, new competitors arrived on the scene, and Homo erectus finally vanished. It's a harsh lesson, honestly. Their extinction teaches us that early success, even a success lasting over 1 million years, does not guarantee forever.
Part 2. The Ice Age neighbors. Okay, we really need to completely reframe how we think about the Neanderthals. Let's just toss out that old image of brutish, slow cavemen. They were actually brilliant, highly specialized survivors. Neanderthals was simply a different answer to the problem of surviving the brutal Ice Age. Their bodies were powerful, shorter, and stockier than ours, built specifically for cold environments where holding on to body heat was literally a matter of life and death. And because food was scarce, they hunted massive animals at incredibly close range. It was an insanely dangerous way to live. In fact, when anthropologists look at their skeletal injuries today, they perfectly mirror the injuries of modern-day rodeo riders. It's the exact same kind of trauma you get from coming way too close to massive, powerful, and angry animals. They used fire, they cared for their injured, and they were far, far from monsters in the dark. Which brings us to their disappearance around 40,000 years ago. Now, the old myth was simple and, well, pretty flattering to us. Homo sapiens arrived, we were smarter, and we destroyed them in some great conquest. But the real answer is so much messier. Neanderthals lived in small, scattered, and very vulnerable populations. Ancient DNA actually shows they had very low genetic diversity toward the end, so they didn't lose one dramatic, epic war against us. Instead, it was more like death by 1,000 cuts. They likely lost 1,000 tiny battles against shifting climates, isolation, a bad winter here, a failed hunt there, all while trying to compete with incoming, highly flexible Homo sapiens. Part 3. The Denisovans. Now, let's move east to what is perhaps the most mysterious chapter of our whole evolutionary family tree, the Denisovans. They are the ultimate ghosts of the human family. As you can see right here, a human species can disappear so completely that almost nothing is left but fragments and code. It's a chilling reality. For Neanderthals, we have full skeletons and burials. But for the Denisovans, who likely lived across a massive swath of Asia and Siberia, their story began with just a tiny single Siberian fingerbone and a few jaw fragments. No cities, no monuments. We barely even know what their faces looked like. A widespread, successful human species just vanished, leaving us almost entirely with just fragments and genetic code. But here's where it gets absolutely incredible. Even though the Denisovans are physically gone, their DNA actively lives on as a genetic shadow within modern populations. Some modern populations in Oceania and Asia still carry their ancestry. And amazingly, modern Tibetans actually inherited a specific version of a gene linked to high-altitude survival directly from Denisovan-related humans. Just think about that for a second. A vanished human group is literally, right now, helping living people breathe in thin mountain air. How wild is that?
So, when did these ghosts finally fade away? Roughly 40,000 years ago. That marks the age of the youngest known Denisovan fossils. Now, some genetic clues do suggest isolated groups might have held on a little bit longer, but essentially, this marks the foggy chapter where their thin populations were either completely outcompeted or just quietly absorbed into incoming Homo sapiens groups.
Part 4. Ghosts and Island Hobbits. Okay, if you thought the Denisovans were strange, let me introduce you to the most astonishing, almost unbelievable branch of the human family, found on the Indonesian island of Flores. 1 meter. That was the height of Homo floresiensis. They were about 3 feet tall. When scientists first discovered their remains, they literally nicknamed them hobbits and could barely believe they were real. These tiny, tool-making humans lived in an ecosystem that honestly sounds like a fantasy novel, or maybe a nightmare. They shared their island with giant carnivorous birds, massive Komodo dragons, and these dwarf elephants called stegodon. At first, people thought, well, maybe these are just diseased modern humans, but they weren't. They were a completely separate species, shaped by a very real biological rule, island dwarfism. On isolated islands with limited food and resources, large animals actually shrink over generations, while smaller animals often grow larger. Homo floresiensis is one of the most dramatic, haunting examples of this evolutionary rule in the entire human family. Yet, just like the others, they are gone. They vanished roughly 50,000 years ago, which is hauntingly close to the exact time Homo sapiens were moving through the region. So the crucial takeaway here is that a species doesn't actually need a massive, global, asteroid-level catastrophe to die out. If you're a small population on an island, you can be completely erased by a simple local chain of bad luck. Maybe the prey declined, maybe a volcano disrupted the ecosystem, or maybe the arrival of Homo sapiens just added enough competition to tip the scales. One bad stretch of generations, and an entire human species is gone forever. Part 5. Why did we survive? So, we've seen all the others fall. Now let's turn the magnifying glass onto ourselves. Why are we the only ones left? It's incredibly tempting to just puff out our chests and say, well, we were smarter. But Neanderthals were brilliant, and Erectus survived for 1,000,000 years. Raw intelligence just wasn't enough. Our survival really came down to the Homo sapiens advantage. We were unusually good at forming wider webs of people. We didn't just live in isolated little bands, we connected. And this meant our culture, our tools, and our ideas traveled much, much farther. If one valley became harsh, our networks allowed us to move and absorb those environmental shocks way better than isolated groups could. And we have to admit, a huge part of it was just the sheer luck of geography, timing, and population size. We were simply in the right places at exactly the right moments. Part 6. The last branch standing. The story of human evolution is absolutely not a straight line leading right to us. I really want to leave you with this deeply provocative final thought. The vanished species, Erectus, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, the hobbits, they were not stepping stones to us. They were not unfinished rough drafts of Homo sapiens. They were their own rich, incredibly unique ways of being human. We are not sitting safely at the top of some evolutionary ladder. We are simply the sole remaining branch of a once very crowded tree. The lesson from our ghosts is crystal clear. Extinction doesn't just happen to the weak. It targets the isolated, the specialized, and the unlucky. It targets those living through changes that happen too fast for them to survive. So the real question is, looking at our own rapidly changing world today, are we careful enough to avoid learning that same lesson? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.